Hi everyone, Adam at Dynamic Therapy. Hope you're doing well. This is the first of 3 videos in relation to the subject of change. So a lot of people at the moment are dealing with a lot of changes in their life, and it's becoming quite overwhelming and anxious for people. The way that the lockdown has hit people in certain ways, and even if people are working, people are still struggling with the changes the world has sort of imposed upon itself, and how we're responding to things, because it's also a lack of control. And change is something that is quite unfamiliar and uncomfortable for people, because you're going from a state of knowing, or you think you know where you are in life, to a state of not knowing. It's unfamiliar territory, and that can sometimes be quite exciting. If you ever go on holiday, you go into an unfamiliar setting, an unfamiliar circumstance to yourself, and you get quite excited about it for weeks and months on end. People could be planning for a holiday, and it could be great. However, when things aren't necessarily in our control, we can look at it and think, this is a terrible change. I didn't ask for all of this. And we can become quite overwhelmed with it and become down with it, and that's okay. But we need to look at what we can be doing around the subject of change, and look into a little bit more detail of what the fear of change is, so that we can move forward from it and move out of it and make it more of a positive experience, which is more manageable for us. So our brains sort of rewire themselves all the time, all day, every day. They're processing new input and stimulus as it comes in. Every time you look around, something's changed in some way, shape or form. And what the brain does, it rewires itself to help us develop, help us to heal, help us to learn, and help us to survive. And that's quite a protective kind of thing to do, isn't it? That's a way of helping us move forward through life. And when we look at change, this alternative situation to what we were already in, it depends how you feel about the situation you're already in, as to how you're going to either passionately enjoy that change, or if you're going to want to rebel against it or become quite fearful of it. Because if it's not your choice, then you only have a choice then as to how you respond to that, and not how the change happens itself. So people have got these fears for all sorts of reasons going on. And change will take us into this sort of unfamiliar territory. But we are creatures of habit. Humans will always create its own structure, and will always create our own routines. And if we don't know something, then we normally are quite inquisitive creatures, in that we'll try and learn what it is that's going on for us, so that we can become more familiar with it, and it can feel more safe for us. So if we know more about a situation, then we feel safer. What we're working with at the moment is this emotion of fear, which is quite a primal emotion, and it's there for a few purposes. The first one is to protect us. Another one is to be supportive of us, to motivate us, to be more in control, and to achieve things. And the last one that fear lets us know is that whatever we're going through is important to us. Because if you wasn't feeling anything about it, it wouldn't be important, would it? So it's amazing that these 3 things, the protector, the supporter, and the one that reminds you that something is actually worthwhile doing, they sound like quite positive sort of characteristics, if that was a friend that was there for you with those characters. So looking at it, we can treat fear as either our friend and our supporter, or we can look at it in a way that it's sort of creating barriers for us and hurdles, and it's holding us back. But fear isn't necessarily saying stop and don't do something, or you can't cope with this. It's not saying that. It's just saying be careful, and be a little bit more cautious, and take things on as they are. So even when situations are bad for people stay in bad situations for a very, very long time. If you look at it from a completely logical sense, if you're in a bad situation, the logical thing to do is to make a change to get it out and to be in a better situation. But the thing is that being in a bad situation sometimes is familiar to that person. That person could have been in that situation for 20, 30 years. You know, if it's things like drug abuse and things like that, and alcoholism, that's a very familiar thing, and people know their life is going to shit. But it's still sometimes more comfortable than not knowing at all. And so when we step into this unknown territory, we feel very vulnerable, and we want to protect ourselves in some way. So we need to look at ways that we can make change more manageable, really, because where we are at the moment, we're in a situation where we feel, say, for instance, through lockdown, that whatever's happened is not in our control. And there's a lot of changes going on that we've got absolutely no bearing over, except we have bearing over ourselves. We have bearing over how we feel. And the one thing that we can choose is our response to change. So whether you are in control of the change that's going to be happening or not, the first thing to consider is, where are you right now? What is going on for you? What is the situation? Is it a situation that you're happy with? What are the things in that situation that you actually quite like? Because there are positives in all of this. What are the things in this situation that you absolutely hate and despise? And what is that big grey area in the middle representing as well? Next thing to then look at is, what is the element or elements that you're going to change within this situation? Because it hasn't got to be absolute, is it? We look at life and as if I've got to make this change and it's going to affect everything. It's not necessarily. It's going to affect big parts sometimes. You know, if you're going to change your job, come out of a relationship, go into a relationship, move house, anything like that, it's going to affect a lot. But it's not going to change everything, and it's not going to change you as a person necessarily unless you let it. So looking at it, how can you sort of identify the bits that are worth changing? And working through all that, you know, looking at that as a sort of an analogy of a house. If you've got a room in the house which you don't like the look of, you're going to decorate it. You're not necessarily going to move house. So there may be a few rooms in that house that you don't like the look of, but the easier and the faster option in all of this normally is to decorate it. Our choice to make change hasn't got to be absolute on the whole situation of our life. And in fact, if we break things down into smaller chunks, then it becomes much more manageable. And then the next thing to be considering then is, how is this change going to alter things that we're going to make? So you've identified firstly the situation that you're in now, you've identified the change you want to make, and now you've got to identify how this change is going to make a difference, because now we're going to be looking at, well, where I am right now, I'm going to make a change, and something is going to and that change is going to influence things around me. And you can't account for absolutely everything in life, and fear is going to play a massive part in this. It's going to be quite loud in telling you that all these things are going to happen potentially, but a lot of good things are going to happen as well. So looking at setting goals, as in like an end goal, is important. As in, I want to make this change because I want this to happen. That's great. And then it's about breaking that down further. So the last step in this is looking at this place where you want to get to and working out how you can break this down into much smaller chunks, because anything is achievable as long as you break it down into smaller steps. You know, within a goal setting, you can either set that goal as in a one-step process of doing nothing to that change, or you can step it into a 100-step process, and each step can be a success in its own right. So looking at it, how can you work around achieving the goal that you want to achieve and making it as manageable and as achievable as possible? And when setting a goal, it is so important to realise that sometimes through the journey of getting towards that goal can actually change itself in some way, because we can realise through self-awareness that the thing we were striving towards either wasn't worth striving for in the first place, or it's just going to need to look a little bit differently for us. So break things down into smaller steps. When looking at change, make it manageable, make it achievable. And first look at the situation you were in. Identify the changes that you want to make. Identify the changes, how the changes are going to look once you've made them, and break them down into small, achievable steps. Because you've got a plan in place, then you can start walking forwards in that plan, and you'll be working towards that goal and those changes. If you feel you haven't got control of that situation or that change that's going to be happening, how are you going to change your response? How are you going to make it more positive? And how are you going to make it more achievable? So, for instance, people who've got anxiety about coming out of lockdown, and that's completely understandable. I mean, we've been consumed within our houses for a long period of time now, potentially with limited contact, if that's the way that you've lived your life. So suddenly, the outside world is becoming a little bit alien to us, and it is creating an anxiety with all sorts of problems. So how can you protect yourself? How can you make it more achievable? I mean, the first thing you can maybe do if you've got a fear of going outside your house into town is just to make the small step, just to step outside your house and get to the end of your boundary of the property. Or the next step could be, taking a walk up to the end of the road and back. Because once you get there and back again, you realise that being out isn't the issue necessarily. Potentially then it's looking at what else is there. So taking a few walks to a few roads on. Once you've done a few roads, then you can look at the idea of then maybe getting into town. But you can work out also, if you've got other anxieties around being in town amongst other people, what they are and how can you work on protecting yourself for that. But just remember, when you do make it to town or make it to your goal point, be kind to yourself and say, I can leave here at any point and go back again. You can take it back another couple of steps. It's not a problem, but it's got to be achievable and it's got to be comfortable and on your terms. So recapping on what was said today, the brain has been serving us with change since actually before we were born. The brain rewires itself to help us to develop, help us to learn, and helps us to survive. Fear plays a very key role in supporting us. It also protects us, and it also reminds us that what we're doing has purpose and has meaning. And then when we're looking at taking on change, whether it's through choice or not, we have to take stock of the situation we're already in. So when we're in that situation, is everything okay with us? Is it all working well? Are there bits in there that I'm not happy with? You then look at moving on. What are the elements that you want to change? It hasn't got to be absolute. You haven't got to change everything about your world and your life. It can just be broken down into smaller parts that you can pick and choose. You can keep some parts in place, take other parts out and work on those. Third part is to consider, if you're going to make a change, then what's the impact of that change likely to have? Is there risks to consider in all of this? And is there ways that you can make those risks a little bit more minimal? And lastly, you work out your route. You worked out a destination, you know you want to change something, you want to make a change. So what's your route? How are you going to get there? What steps are you going to take? Break it down into as many steps as you need to for it to be achievable and comfortable for you. So that concludes the first part of the small change series I'm doing. The second part will follow. Thank you very much for listening. Keep well. Bye-bye.